Hello, Killjoys! Welcome. It is Thursday, meaning it is time for the Killjoy Guide, the Left Feminist podcast for the 99%. I'm your host, Killjoy Meg. Welcome to the show. I'm so excited to see everybody. Let me shout out some comments here real quick. We got Nadia. Hey, Nadia. Yes, thank you, Robin. Robin, always a very loyal watcher. Yes, welcome to the Killjoy Guide. Thank you. Hey Nadia, it's so good to see you too. Oh yeah, so many good live streams. You never have a bad live stream here at FHL. Hey Quaker Socialist. Alright guys, I have a excellent show for you today. So today we're going to talk about what is wrong with Western feminism. And in order to have that discussion, let's please welcome someone that you all will know from Historically. You know her from Historically and from Late Nights with Lenin. Please welcome Esha Krishnaswamy. Hey Esha, welcome to the show.
My name perfectly. That was amazing. Thank you.
I've been practicing. But so welcome to the show, Esha. I'm so excited to have you here.
Same here. It was very interesting, and I love the way you've decorated your room. It's like
Thank
the most
you.
interesting. Yeah, I have to put a green screen on because my room's so messy. I don't want people to know what it's behind me.
I actually thought you were outside. That's impressive.
I'm visiting my sister, so I'm in Connecticut, so I am outside right now.
Oh.
Normally, when I'm home, I have a green screen.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I like to have a nice backdrop. So I was just like, okay, I have this bookshelf anyway, so let me just put some nice books up here. I have all my feminisms and all my other books that I have over here. I have all kinds of different stuff. And everybody knows on my show I love to give a good book recommendation. So I recommend a lot of books, I can tell you.
Good.
All right, so today for the show, I really wanted to continue the conversation that we've been having over the last several weeks about what's happening in Afghanistan. Last week I had, as you guys all know, I had on Mon, who is a nurse who is from Afghanistan. And so we had a really pleasant conversation, and we really got into the nitty-gritty of the history of Afghanistan. So I really wanted to continue that conversation and really get into why we have what the problem is with our narrative around Afghanistan, particularly the save women narrative that we have. So I think Esha has a lot to say about that. I can see by the look on her face. So Esha, let's go ahead and get started. How are you feeling about our current? I was saying that we're still very much involved in Afghanistan. We haven't really withdrawn from Afghanistan, and I think we will. But so, what are your feelings about what is happening right now?
Okay. If it's feelings, honestly, I don't exactly know what's happening, to be sure. But I'm not surprised. But I also want to reassure everyone that the warlord government that the U.S. put in charge was not at all good for women. And just because you don't hear about all the atrocity porn doesn't mean it was not going on. So I guess to begin with this story, we need to start with 1978 when Afghanistan had a democratic revolution and they had a democratic government. Well, if anyone's seen my Means TV imperialism video, we know that the U.S. can never actually have democracy because the minute you allow people to have democracy, people are going to vote to say, hey, go away, you Westerners, stop stealing our resources and stop looting our country. So then, of course, the U.S. can never, ever, ever do that because that's just not the way capitalism works. There'll always be a point where people, if you give them the choice, they'll be like, go away. And America, the way everyone, so many more percentage of the people here are able to have moderately comfortable lives, but it's fewer and fewer as time goes on, as we can tell. is because America, what it does is basically it loots a lot of raw materials from what you call the third world, and then manufactures it within their control and dumps it back there for excessive profits, like putting all the locals out of business, and blah, blah, and the cycle goes on and on and on. Eventually, we will run out of countries to exploit, but that's what was going on. And so during the 1980s, of course, and the 70s, I can't remember, what's Mika Brzezinski's dad's name? Zbigniew. How do you pronounce his name? I can never do that.
Who was it?
Mika Brzezinski's dad, Zbigniew, whatever. The Secretary of State.
I'm not sure.
Okay, the Secretary of State under Carter.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay.
the Secretary of State under Carter decided that you can't have a democratic Afghanistan. And they decided to arm the just the vilest people. There's a State Department cable. They literally
armed the Mujahideen. Yeah.
Mujahideen. They literally armed highway robbers. I'm not kidding. It's in that cable. And what they did was Afghanistan, back then, had an illiteracy rate of 92%. So they were these people were like the wealthiest people who were benefiting from all that exploitation. And so they were given unbelievable amount of arms, like billions of dollars worth of weaponry. And then they were given marks, which is a lot of people. So that's the first clue. It should tell you that it's not like that. They're not fighting oppression. If you need Saudis, like Bin Laden and whatnot, like all the others, the Kuwaiti, like you should be able to raise an army in your own country if the government's if you have like billions of dollars worth of aid. But they couldn't. They had to get Saudis, the Kuwaiti, just like assorted scum from all over the world, of course. And they ended up, the really weird thing was that when the Soviets left, the democratic government of Afghanistan stood for another 4 years. Here, like when the U.S. left, this warlord government can't even withstand a week. And there's an obvious reason. That was a democratic government. You're willing to fight and die in order to, you're willing to die. Like if it's for like your country, your freedom, your children, your grandchildren being able to eat, you're willing to fight and die for another 4 years. If it's for some warlord's heroin business, you're going to be like, okay, I surrender. So, so then they eventually, because the U.S. dumped so much arms and so much money, it's in the billions of dollars, in 1992, they finally overran the democratic government. But guess what? These assorted warlords started to have a turf war over who gets to control which, of their resource. And so what you got was Hekmatyar, Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, who was, I believe he was Pashtun, I'm not sure actually, but he was trained by the Pakistani intelligence service. He started to shell Kabul city in order, and then what's his name? Masood, Ahmad Shah Masood's militia, they started to have a fight, and then it was a civil war that lasted 4 years because these people were literally like think of like drug dealers, you know how they fight over per force? That's what these people were doing with Afghanistan for 4 years. And during this time, there was a few Pashtun commanders who were part of the Mujahideen, as in they were armed by the CIA, trained by the CIA. And there was a lot of people that they recruited from Pakistani refugee camps who were Pashtuns. And a lot of them were just young students back then, hence the word Taliban means student. So eventually, after 4 years, by the way, these Mujahideen people, they were, I can't even tell you how disgusting they were. Like, the first, I believe the Taliban got their first strong, hold within Kandahar, and that was because they kidnapped and gang raped, 4 girls, and the Taliban basically rescued them. And they hung the guy who was, this warlord who kidnapped and raped and lots of horrible. So then in 1996, I guess they were able to contain the warlords, and so the Taliban did control about 60% of the country towards the Pakistan area, because that was the majority Pashtun area. But there was a northern area that's, I believe, Tajik, and so the Tajik area they were not able to control, and that was with the Northern Alliance.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so that went on for another 5 years, and somehow 9/11 happened. And magically, by the way, so when the Taliban was in power, the people who lost the most were these warlords who were part of the Northern Alliance, and magically they got put back into power. So in December of 2001, Bush had this conference called the Bonn Conference, where they had 4 warlord factions, and the Taliban were excluded completely, and these warlord factions signed a agreement, the Treaty of Bonn, where they nominated this. He's kind of like a PR guy, I guess, not like a real leader because he doesn't really command any armies, but it was like he's like a fun, good for the U.S. face. Like he dresses orientally, but then he's not too offensive, like Hamid Karzai. But what the media did not focus on was that else was in his cabinet. So so there was this guy named Fahim, who was a disgusting warlord from the Tajik area. There was Dostum, who was an Uzbek warlord, who was also the deputy, whatever. It was just, there was a lot of different warlords. And the U.S. government actually worked with these warlords. So one of the first war crimes was that General Dostum, I believe his name is Abdul, but right now I'm just going to call him General Dostum. I can't remember off the top of my head, so I might get it wrong. If anyone in the chat wants to Google, it's Doustum, General Dostum. He actually had a private prison where he tortured and killed nearly like 500 people that they called Taliban, but a lot of them were just ethnic Pashtun villagers. Like Pashto is one of the major languages, and Pashtuns are the biggest ethnic group in that. It's one of the biggest ethnic groups, and they were the primary backing for the Taliban in the first iteration. And and then the U.S. said, "Oh, that's unfortunate," and kind of didn't do much. And then he stayed in power, and he eventually became the vice president. And when he was vice president, he ordered the rape of another male governor for standing up to him. So it's disgusting. Like I can't. So then what happened is that these different little militias, basically it went back to being a warlord state. So you know what that means? That means that let's say that there's a highway between Kandahar and Quetta, Pakistan. Like that's the only way you can get goods. Guess what? You're gonna stop. You're gonna drive 30 kilometers. The first warlord faction is gonna be like, okay, give us 100 rupees, or else we're in Pakistani money, not Afghan, or else we're gonna not let you pass and take your car. And so literally you can't actually go from place to place if you can't pay the bounty. That's so sweet, Steve Richter. And let's see. They even had milk cartels. I tweeted about this, where this like milk delivery person was telling this happened in
milk cartel.
Yeah, they had drive-by shootouts over like this guy was saying that how he couldn't deliver milk. I tweeted about this, but because he like 2 different warlord factions had asked him for bribes, and he couldn't like actually go. And so you can't do much if you're in a country controlled by warring warlords who are having turf wars. I mean, so you know how heroin is in the U.S. Unfortunately, milk, sugar, literally anything else, the only way you can make money is if by permission of the warlord and giving him tribute. And and so then even on that same year, a lot of Pashtun villagers were talking about how these warlords just like robbed them of their family ancestral land that they've had for thousands of years. But the way property worked was different in Pashtun. It was not the same as American kind of like square. It's a different story, like property, but they basically appended entire villages. So there was this one village, the chief, who said that basically his village used to have 3,000 people, and then these warlords came, and then they only had 800 people, and God knows what happened to the other thousands of people. So, and this is not just one story, 2 stories. So this was just and the U.S. another thing was that if you like stood up to the warlord, let's say the warlord was trying to take your house, guess what? The warlord would tell you, hey, that was a terrorist, and then it's going to go whoosh, whoosh. And then your house, the U.S. like cleared the house for the warlord to take and turn it into an opium field. So the U.S. government was, I mean, not abused per se, but I mean, it's like, it's all done on purpose. There's a reason why these GIs are kept really ignorant about everything in the local culture, and they don't speak the language. And it was all designed to help maximize profit for whoever was looting, and it worked well. Yeah. So for the past 20 years, and if you look at the Council for Foreign Relations report, what you see is that there was no unified identity, that each warlord brought them like their militia for the federal army, but there was still no federal army. It was literally people fighting for the warlords. And then as for the women, one of these warlords was like a rabid sexist who was known for throwing acids into women's faces for teaching people how to read and write. So these women were saying like they were just like afraid to go outside because now these warlords that they just were like that was abusing them were there. And then if you look at stories, you'll see that all these girls were getting kidnapped and raped, and a lot of them were killed too. We'll never hear about them because the U.S. like our U.S. media doesn't really. And I mean, but the thing is, I just did one search in not even in like Urdu, and one Urdu search should not give me that much, but it did, and it's because it's not that hard to get this information. It's just that no one cares in the U.S. to go do it. Right. And if I've spoke Pashto, I bet you there's even more out there for anyone who speaks Pashto. Like, definitely go find these, do a good YouTube search and just at least go subtitle them because that'll be useful. So I guess the difference is with warlord law and Sharia law is at least I guess sure this is not an well, we actually don't know what right now the Taliban are doing or what the government will be, because it seems like they're in negotiation with a lot of different ethnic groups. So we should wait patiently and not like jump to conclusions because I don't know. But assuming like they're just the way they were in the 90s, even then, under that version of the Sharia law, it would be illegal to kidnap girls and have like pedophile sex slaves, and have like usury and things like that. So if you think about it from what they were facing between 92 and 96, it makes sense. And if you really think about who was left and who was killed in these like 40 years, the majority that were killed were the poorest, the communists, the secular people. So a lot of people in Afghanistan who aligned with the Taliban had to make a Sophie's choice, like this warlord who's going to kidnap my daughter, or this religious fanatic who won't kidnap my daughter. But so it's like that's what happened, but the way it's being presented is, oh my God, it was heavenly between these 2002 and 2021, and oh my God, what about the women? And if you really cared about the women, the year you should have spoken up was 1978.
No, absolutely. And just kind of like to bolster your point here was this article from The Nation in which they talked to women from RAWA, which is the radical organization for women of Afghanistan. Yes. And one of the things that it says here is that leaders like Khan was one of the leaders from the Northern Alliance that the United States backed.
What's his first name? Because there's a lot. Khan just
let me come up here. Ismail Khan.
Ismail Khan? Okay. Yeah.
So it says it says here that the Taliban lost control of Kabul in 2001 to Northern Alliance. who took a similar approach to women's rights as the Taliban. So there was no real ideological difference between the two groups.
Except
says that in that women in Herat, in 2002, women in Herat told the Human Rights Watch that while they had access to education, virtually every aspect of their lives is still policed in Herat. Every decision of every day presents dangers or challenges from Khan's government, where they can go, how they can get there, whom they can go with, and how they can dress. That for years, leaders like Khan... Go ahead.
Even this is too Western, like even about dressing.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about, could they walk on the street and get milk without a drive-by? Were their sons kidnapped to be child soldiers? Like, those are, like, often Westerners don't even understand, like, what kind of questions to ask. Like, this one, like, the dressing is so far out of...
Yeah, that is a very Western,
Like even that, like, right now, I mean, the things are so bad that, like, the question they should have asked is, hey, how many children of yours have been kidnapped to be child soldiers? And also another question they could have asked is, so did they steal any of your land so that now you can't feed yourself? And let's not forget, like, if there's so much, like, patriarchy, guess what happens when you kill a woman's husband because you're American and you just don't care and you just go boom.
You're basically leaving that woman by herself.
She's homeless and she starves, and then and then it spirals to worse and worse.
Absolutely.
I saw a case where they killed some 80-year-old man who was a village. He was like the part of the village democratic council. Like, they had a very democratic system. Ironically, that was one of the first places the U.S. hit. And then they left this woman, his like 18-year-old son, paralyzed, and this woman had to take care of this 18-year-old son, and she was like already in her 60s or grandson maybe, I don't know. It was just really horrible stuff. And like I said, the worst thing is that Westerners can't even ask the right questions to know how bad things are. Like,
no, absolutely. Like it was also true of. Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, go ahead. I didn't mean to go on a rant.
Yeah, but it was absolutely, it's also true of, like, the Yazidi women who became, like, sex slaves of ISIS. Like, they would go over and, like, interview these Yazidi women about, like, about what's happening to them. They never ask them what they need. They never ask them, like, what more that can be done to help them. Like, there was no question like that. They're just like, oh, thank you for your interview. Bye-bye. Good luck. Well, good night and good luck.
They should just ask them to tell their story of what's important,
right?
Because it's like Westerners can think about the aesthetics and the look, the feel, but if you're really, really hungry and you have a choice between, you have to do Sophie's Choice, like from the movie, every day. There's a whole different set of concerns that they have that we can't even imagine. So it's like, oh, do I have to hide him? Oh, my daughter's 12. Okay, would I have to hide her so that these militia lords don't kidnap and rape her? Like, okay, what am I going to do? Like, all these kind of things that the problem is, like, they don't even understand, like, the kind of situations where these kind of Sophie's Choice is logical. And what you realize is that when you're given the situation, most people are very logical. So on TikTok, I put up a video where this baker was comparing the warlord government to the Taliban, and he said, from the point of view of security, the Taliban were good. At least I could take the money I made at the bakery and walk home, which he couldn't do because they were extorting him. And they actually had to create a new payment system to stop these warlords from extorting their like the government employees, to bypass them. And even then they lost about $30 to $100. Like, so it's, I guess the thing is that Westerners don't have the concept of the depth of inhumanity. I was also put up a video on TikTok where I show you this like family of people who have to be slaves at this brick factory because their dad got sick, and in order to pay the rent, all these children who are from age like 9 to 14 are working, making the bricks 12 hours a day.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's basically exactly what this article that we were looking at is saying, is that there was virtually no, like, there was virtually no ideological difference, but, like, as Mon said in my stream last week, like, it basically is just like, okay, whatever's gonna make the fighting stop.
Yeah,
whatever's gonna make the fighting stop, just, like, if that means the Taliban is in charge, then fine, the Taliban is in charge. Just make the fighting stop. Stop making our lives so fucking difficult.
Well, in the beginning, a lot of people were okay with the U.S. occupation government. They're just like, we don't want the war, we want safety, and then things became worse and worse. And
yeah, because, like, as it says here, it's like, under Khan, like, he did little for women.
No.
Yeah.
I think that misunderstands the thing. He did not do little for women. He actually had a little civil war with General Dostum in 2006 with his private militia, and in Herat, women were kidnapped and raped by his men all the time, and there was impunity. So saying he did little for women is actually wrong. What he did was he turned their life into hell, and like, hold on, let me just find the video about him that I was making, because to say that he did little for women is like,
because it even says here, like, the women accounted for 80% of suicides. Okay, 80% of suicides. That's crazy.
Because he would kidnap and okay. So I've Ismail Khan apparently in Ismail Khan would kill and rape girls with impunity. There's a 2003 700 women in Western Herat and 200 184 children have been sexually assaulted in Herat by these militiamen. And this was in 2002. So another, let's see.
These are the groups that the U.S. was funding, by the way. These were the groups that the U.S. was backing, and they were the ones who were sexually assaulting women and children.
Gang raping. Gang raping women.
Gang raping.
He's actually arguably in, like, he was, like, I believe he was a drug lord, but I could be wrong. Oh my God. Okay, he kidnapped and murdered, raped thousands of Pashtun. Women, and 51%, and they were too afraid to go to the police because he is the police. So they had to report, and these are the people who we know about. There are God knows how many more that we don't know about because they were dead or buried. Oh, let me see if there's a mass grave.
And this is just just barely breaking the surface. Like as we're saying, like this is like Khan and these Northern Alliance, like, this was the group that the United States backed. And even on the other side, like, we're supporting Saudi Arabia, who was... Okay, go ahead.
I just read an article that Ismail Khan forced women to have chastity tests in December of 2002. Thank you. He had to flee the city by helicopter, and he was also known for extortion, as in he would kidnap people's daughters and say, "I'm going to rape your daughter if you don't give me $100." And people actually gave their entire life savings to stop that. So he was to say that he did little for women is
he was a sadistic motherfucker. Is really the thing to say. He did negative good for women. Negative.
He was actually, I mean, arguably.
Jesus.
Yeah, this is here. And then, like,
this is the guy that we backed.
Yeah.
This is the guy that we backed in Afghanistan.
And then, like, what you see is that if you look at the.
But yes, we care about women.
The Democratic government a lot of people, you'll see, like, a lot of women are going to school for the first time. There's a women's militia. There are women police officers. There's, like, people who have autonomy. Like, the villagers are getting to decide what to do and not the warlords. They kick them out. And so, yeah, these people, yeah, they've literally, like, and these were the same people. And it seems like the ones that won the most from 9/11 are the ones who lost the most when the Taliban took over, when they lost. Yeah, and the funny thing is, when he said U.S. supported that perv, I don't know which one. There are thousands of them. In fact, there's a case where, thank you, Abhishek Sengupta. There's a case where basically thank you, chaotic energy. Yeah, there was a. He's right. Turkey Days, right? And that's exactly what happened. And we don't know. Like, you keep seeing these, like, mass graves, and they kind of gloss over it, and they say, like, Afghan, like, they're kind of vague. They might say anti-Taliban forces or Taliban, like, they don't really know. ISIS, well, they'll just make up something, and you'll never know. I mean, you will if you do the effort and go ask that one old guy who survived the village, who's going to tell you who did it. But after you give him protection, but still, it's the same case. I mean, so Hamid and Ashraf Ghani was he was not a warlord, but he was a puppet who was he was in Washington for a long time. He started his own think tank about failed states. And he was the president, and his vice president was General Dostum, who was the sadistic Uzbek warlord. So, thank you, Marcia.
Thank you, Marcia.
Yeah. Sorry, I just went on a rant. But
No, you're good.
These were horrible, horrible people. And, of course, I forgot to tell you this thing. So in 2016, they had laundered so much money that the army officers did not have boots. And in 2020, a lot of them said that their chef would not cook enough food to, like, feed the army. And so they were treated horribly. So, of course, the National Army is not going to fight for these jackasses to be able to, like, extort more money from Afghanistan. And that's why they all surrendered en masse.
Oh, goodness gracious. Yeah, I know that you had wanted to share something from WikiLeaks about what's happening in Afghanistan.
No. Yeah, I sent it to you via Twitter.
Yeah, I have it here.
Show you. Okay, so we don't have it, like, just put it there so, like, it doesn't need to be on the screen for people to see. But basically what they say from Section 4 is that for the democratic government, like, anyone who this democratic government, given Afghanistan's poverty and backwardness, this democratic government deserves genuine support from anyone who is interested in improving the lot for Afghan people. A few paragraphs later, they'll say, but that's against U.S. interests. And then they're like, okay, we're gonna arm these literal highway robbers. A few more paragraphs later, but that part was, like, shocking that they admitted that, given anyone who, like this regime, like the democratic government, deserves genuine support for anyone interested in improving the lot for the Afghan people. And show that leak anytime somebody's like, what about the women? What about the Hazara? Like, they'll make up some random group. What about the Hazaras? Like, they care about Shias. Oh, come on. Like, they can tell the difference between a Shia and a Sunni. So they'll continue with this to pull on your heartstrings, and you should not be manipulated, because it's like they're not lying, but they're not giving you the whole truth. Yes. Like between the people who have weapons, I guess, I don't know what to say other than that. And this time it seems like the Taliban have a lot bigger. So it takes lots of effort. It's not easy to, like, overthrow an existing state structure without popular support. Like, I mean, it might not be, I don't know how to explain it, but in order to raise a militia to fight like and overthrow the government who's very deeply entrenched, they must be really terrible. And generally speaking, though, you don't have to. If you like, if the U.S. stops arming people, eventually, things will be democratic in that it's impossible to not do the democratic thing and like you literally need to just translate Lenin's collected works and send them there. Hello, Gunny. And you don't need to actually worry about whether or not they're going to oppress people, because the Afghans have been around for thousands of years and they know what to do. They just don't. They can't handle $6 billion worth of weapons of mass destruction rained upon them. So, so that's what people don't understand. Like, it'll always go towards. It might not be the government you like. I mean, they might, and Western style governments may not work for them. They might have a different government, but that does not mean it's not based on popular will. Right. But the thing is that, but of course, this is based on the thing that the U.S. will stop the weapons flow. Because of course, when the U.S. is doing the weapons flow, then of course you can't rely on humanity, like human society taking its course. But every time in a third world country, the minute you cut off the gravy train, it always trends towards a more democratic government. Like, because things are so bad, if the government doesn't do things like create train lines, make highways, purify the water. Nadia's right. I don't know about Mech, but definitely Item, yes.
Yeah.
Mech I thought was from Iraq, but I could be wrong.
Yeah. All right, really quick. Frank, thank you so much for the super chat. Like, nobody watching, American Guild. Well, you gotta share the stream. Share the stream, guys. That way we can get more eyeballs on us.
It seems like quite a few people are... It seems like quite a few people are watching from the comments.
All right, so we're talking a lot about, like, the fact that the U.S. backed, basically a warlord who was raping women.
Not just one. No, not just one.
Warlords, plural.
Akhmatiyar, Ismail Khan. There was Dostum. Those are the ones I can. Oh, there was the Masood gang. So those are the ones I can name off the top of my head. There were more than one, and there are more. So these are just ones.
Oh yeah. So the U.S. was funding warlords, plural. Right, thank you, Frank, for the second super chat. Mwah. Yes, we will keep speaking truth. Absolutely. But, so we were funding warlords who were raping women and kidnapping children and all kinds of nasty bullshit. And yet we want to stay in Afghanistan for the sake of saving women. So I want to bring up
women, like feminine, like
oh my gosh,
gender identity of women. Of course, the next day you see the CNN article that ghoulishly says Taliban sitting under like $500 trillion worth of lithium or whatever.
Yeah, you think it might have to do with the lithium and also the fact that it's like right next to Russia and China. You can keep a better eye on those countries. Yeah, I think it has to do with a little bit more with that. Man, that kind of raises my point here about the fact that this is a rise of what's known as femonationalism. So femonationalism, huh?
What is that?
Yeah, I'm going to get to that. So femonationalism, as defined by Sarah Ferris, and I talked about this a little bit on last week's roundtable. So femonationalism is the strategy of using women's rights, interventionist, natalist policies in the language of feminism for the purposes of the far right, in which European liberals, also U.S. liberals, secularists, and right-wing politicians usurp women's rights and feminism to encroach upon religious freedom, women's bodies, and migration under the banner of femonationalism. So basically arguing, and you see this even too with like the bans of the hijab or burkinis in countries like France. Like, oh, we have to liberate. It's a Western supremacist thinking that we must liberate Muslim women from this very misogynistic Muslim culture because they're being oppressed by that culture. So we must come in and save them.
Why not just unfreeze all the money you've looted? Because France still has it's in the what do you call it, the what do you call it? I forgot. The CFA franc zone, and for 14 majority Muslim African countries, they still are like have like half their national treasury stuck. So if they really wanted to save the women, I would just like transfer all that money to African women and Muslim women over there and see what they do with that. But of course, still not. You see, it's all about keeping up the imperialist. You have to be like sucking them dry of their natural resources, and that's why all this stuff is not talking about the actual.
Yeah, and that's absolutely what all of this is about. They're not actually going in to protect women or save women. It's they're using women, and that's what makes this really actually very sexist and actually very anti-feminist, is that they're using women as a product, saying that women, like, they have no control over their bodies, they're under the control of, and this is very much about, is very xenophobic and orientalist, because it's saying particularly women under Islam are oppressed, but no talking about Western women. But it's this idea that there's a Western supremacy. Western women are so enlightened, we're so empowered, so we must go in and do the same for these oppressed Muslim women.
Okay, so first of all, like, who armed these fanatics? Like, the Saudis, I actually wrote an article called Soldiers of the Empire, because they have been in, like, the Saudi, like, the Wahhabi strain of Islam. That's like the really most repressive one. That's actually they had a small little town until the British just like gave them lots of weapons and they overtook the entire country, and then they found oil in their country, give it to these Wahhabis, and these Wahhabis have been like setting up all these mosques everywhere. So what you realize is that without Western support, these fanatics would not be in power. They would have had a very democratic legislation, very democratic system, except for the fact that the West literally armed these fanatics to stop the will of the people from coming through. And again, if you can't talk about why, I mean, if you're gonna arm Ismail Khan, who likes to gang rape women and like hold people's daughters hostage, well, it is in control of a warlord and his gang, but to call it Islam seems kind of dishonest, because you're the one who armed him with like stingers and all sorts of like weapons that we can't even imagine. Like the one who started shelling Kabul in 1992, even after he won, Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, he was given his own militia was given $1.8 billion in weapons. Yeah. That's a lot of work.
Right, so it's like, okay, so you're wanting to save women, but it was because you armed the Mujahideen in the 80s. Yeah.
The Mujahideen.
Mujahideen,
yeah.
But it's because you armed the Mujahideen that you were able to, that we had a problem in the first place, in order to break up the Soviet-Afghan relationship that was actually thriving in Afghanistan at the time. So you armed the Mujahideen, who made shit horrible, and then continued to fund them against the Taliban as they were raping women.
Where they've continued to fund, I think they were, I don't exactly know, but I can't be 100% sure, between 96 and 2001. But definitely after 2002, yes, these warlords were funded for the next 20 years.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, so they have absolutely no leg to stand on when they say we're doing this to save women. Like, you were literally funding the warlords that were raping women. So you have no ground. Like, okay, so maybe what? Because even in that article from before, the Nation article, it said that 2/3 of girls and women in Afghanistan, even after the U.S. Began their occupation, even during that time, only 2/3 of women and girls still were not educated. So, like, they're saying that they were putting all this funding and all this aid into girls' education, but yet still 2/3 of girls were not educated.
Yeah,
so I'm sorry, where exactly was all this support for women going? Well, so you were funding just like the elite women to get educated, while the other women were getting raped.
No, not even that. Let me tell you exactly where the money was going. So the first one is U.S. aid money. So the U.S. aid money, what would happen is that they, for example, in order to build schools, guess what? They gave it to the government, which was made up of all these warlords, who then gave these contracts to build these buildings to their like cousin or whoever other like patron. And then these schools were never built. And then another thing. So that was where the first money was going. For the farming, you know what they did? The USA went and gave these people wheat seeds, but it was Monsanto patented wheat seeds that would just extract them money over and over. So a lot of these farms went bankrupt after about a year because they could not pay the royalties to reseed their farm. And they just left it, and then these warlords took over and grew opium. So those were like So, and then you had a lot of these just like Western contractors who were just like, God knows what they were doing these studies that didn't really study anything. They just went there and just wasted money. And so it's like, war is really good for business. And they won't tell you about the fact that a lot of female jobs like went out of business because they couldn't grow food in order to I don't know, because they were patented. So yeah, it always comes with a catch, and you can't go to school if you're afraid that the governor might rape you, like kidnap your daughter, just because he wants your land, to grow opium, like just things like that. So they're in Kabul. Which video?
I'm not sure. I had that by accident. Agency crows about supplying stingers to Muji. Where were the surface to air at the Pentagon in 9/11 exactly?
Huh?
That's a good question.
They were not rural. They were fully trained marks. They like for photo ops, you had them look like a lot of them weren't even Afghan. They came from all over. And a really strange thing, I forgot this one. You know how when they defeated the democratic government, you know where a lot of these Mujahideen magically ended up? Bosnia in 1992, between 1992 and 96. And that was, a lot of them ended up in Bosnia. And in fact, Osama bin Laden's top man, Ayman al-Zawahiri, his brother was funded by the CIA in Kosovo. It's like wherever the U.S. wants to war, it seems like these people are rebranding and going. And then they came back to Afghanistan, and then they magically ended up in Syria. And I think they might have done a detour in Libya, but I'm not sure about that. But a lot of them ended up in Syria, and you're like, why do these people keep going wherever the U.S. wants to war? You don't know. So it's like
it's almost like it's a psyop or something.
I mean, I don't know what it is, but it's it needs deeper study than we're capable of doing. But you see that it's like the same people popping up. And for me, what feels irresponsible is that Dan Rather, for example, covered the 1992. I have a video of him covering the 1992 shelling of the of Kabul by these psychos. But then by 2002, he doesn't remember, and he kind of says, "Oh, this is a democratic government," even though he himself like covered the 1992 these psychos like. So it's like the lack of institutional memory. I don't know. Google was Google around back then? I don't know, but it seems like you should be able to remember. Somebody in the country should have been able to remember who these warlords were, like to be put back in place 10 years later, and recreate a fuss. But all the news networks just stayed quiet as though these were new people who were, as opposed to the old warlords, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, I forgot. Hamid Karzai, the president, his brother had a lobbying agency in Washington in 1999. And then 2 years later, he became the president of Afghanistan. No, I'm sure the lobbying had nothing to do with it, but yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So all you see...
Yeah, but just to reiterate, that point, it's like, all this is just, a shell game of, wanting to go into these countries to, have geopolitical,
looting.
Looting, like, be able to, have access, like, whether it's Turkey or Afghanistan, like, be able to have, a base there, that way you can easily target whoever you need to target. Like, even though we have, Israel in the region, too, which Israel is just another kind of shell company for the United States, basically. That's basically what they are. Israel is a shell company. They're a shell country. And they get away with whatever the fuck they want.
I'd say Afghanistan was way more, like, there are factions in Israel that organically, Afghanistan, the way with the warlord government, it was 100% a shell government. And, I mean, it had basically people supported and funded. We're back at war with East Asia because they're trying to do a coup in Thailand and Myanmar. The Eurasia part is, I guess, I don't know what's happening in Eurasia, but definitely East Asia is getting worse. Oh, and the Philippines, so.
All right, this one's just kind of funny, so I'll just put it up. We didn't even get any decent war movies out of Afghanistan.
We got Rambo at the end. This movie is dedicated to brave Mujahideen warrior that they had to change. Yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah, I think was it Rambo 2 or 3?
Yeah, so speaking of a lily pad for the U.S. to launch terrorist attacks, the new Atlas shows demonstrably NED-backed Bulak, am I saying that right? Bulak terrorists. Baluch terrorists blew up Chinese engineers for a Belt and Road project.
Yep, this is the second one. So, Balochistan is, I guess it crosses Iran, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. And magically, so China is building a dam so that they can get power and water and electricity in a lot of these remote places. And yeah, last week, one of the things that magically blew up, and 2 Chinese, I believe, engineers were killed. And one happened a few months ago. So And then the really confusing part is that there's a Pakistani Taliban, which has very different roots than the one in Afghanistan. So the ones that shot up the school in Pakistan is actually like a different terrorist organization with different roots than the ones that may be in power in Afghanistan. And it's, like I said, most people don't know what's going on either. Like, if they're talking, they're talking.
Well, I mean, apparently there is a Pashtun region in Pakistan, because I know that's where Malala Yousafzai is from.
Yeah. There's a bigger region in Pakistan.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is that what you get is that there's a lot of talking heads, literally talking, not knowing what they're talking about. So people just have to remember, even if they're on CNN, they probably don't know as much as you do. And if you know nothing, they know less than you. And they're paid to know less than you.
Yeah. That's why it's good to have, good voices, like yours, like Mon's, and to be able to kind of break this stuff down and we can really talk about it. As, like, there's so much that, as you said, like, that people just don't know because we're meant not to know. Because if we don't know what's actually going on, they can tell us whatever the hell they want to. That way, and manufacture consent to make us to just follow along. Like, you saw polling go, I believe, go up after, with all the rhetoric that's been going on, that now people don't want to leave Afghanistan. It's like,
but you're asking it's people, why the bleep will you ask these people who are benefiting from imperialism whether or not, like, it's like asking a whole bunch of, like, people who shared the loot, do you still want to continue robbing the bank?
True.
No,
yeah.
You don't ask the robbers, like, and their, I guess, Americans, no matter how much you're going to say this, you do share a lot of the loot. So stop, like, I don't even know why American public is the right people to ask about whether or not we need to leave Afghanistan, because it's like literally asking the bank robbers, do you want to continue robbing this bank? And the bank robbers will say yes. So the people that need to be asked is the Afghanistan villagers, like, oh, how many children have you lost? Oh my God, did your husband just disappear? Oh, you're the only survivor in your entire village and you're 80. And oh my God, no one should, like, those kind of people are not going to be asked. So the fact that the poll had the audacity to ask just Americans about it shows you how depraved the media is, because you're not feeling the beauty of the bombs, as Brian Williams would say. Oh my God, he's a psychopath. That's like he praised the guy on MSNBC, Brian Williams. He talked about how beautiful, like, these bombs over Syria look like, and I'm like, psycho. So the fact that they even had the audacity to ask people that poll sounds pretty disgusting to me.
Right, it's just the same as whenever, like...
Should we stop robbing the bank? Should we stop robbing?
Right.
Like, do you want to continue robbing your neighbor's fridge? Yes. But you need to ask the neighbor, do you want this guy to continue to rob your fridge? He'll say no.
Right, it's just like the same as what the Iraqis who were killed in Syria, who, the reason that they were killed, I think they were in Syria, but yeah, I'm pretty sure. But so it was the Iraqis that the Iran-backed militia that
that's code. Yeah. Sorry, that's code for
like the Iran-backed militia that Biden bombed in Syria, who were Iraqis who were backed by Iran in Syria. But the reason that they were bombed is because they attacked Americans, because they want Americans to leave.
Yeah.
It wasn't like an attack on them. It was like, just get the fuck out of our country. You don't need to be here.
And there were anytime you see Iran backed, that's just code for Shia. I just erase that in my mind, and I just put Shia Muslims, and that's usually what it means. And usually there isn't even evidence that they're backed by Iran. Like, so, I mean, I usually, but I don't go out of my way to find evidence if they're backed by Iran, because I don't really care. But usually, like with the Houthis in Yemen, they always say Iran backed, but I have yet to find evidence that they are backed by Iran. I don't know who sells them weapons, but, like...
Yeah, we know who sells Saudi Arabia weapons. And we know who Saudi Arabia... We also know that Saudi Arabia is bankrolling the Taliban.
No, they're bankrolling Al-Qaeda.
Okay.
The Taliban...
I read differently. I read that it was the Taliban. Maybe I was wrong.
They are bankrolling... Okay, the Taliban come from the school of Islam called Deobandi. And that's originally... I mean, they're far right-wing and totally psycho, but they're not... They're from that region. I mean, they come from the Deobandi school is from the Indian, Pakistan, Kashmir area. So it's different than Salafi. So the Saudis back the Salafis, which are the Al-Qaeda members and all the other... There's too many militias to talk about. Etim, for example, that is Saudi backed in some ways, but not the Afghani Taliban, I guess.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, I think I had read that somewhere, and maybe I was just wrong on that. So
No,
if I am, then I'm okay with
I'm
being
not
wrong.
100% sure on the Pakistani version of the Taliban. At him, yes, I can tell you that. But then I don't know who these Saudi. I believe I can just check later. I'll tweet it out. But not this version of the Taliban. Pakistan's ISI, on the other hand, and maybe India now, because the chief of the chief military dude graduated from the Indian military academy, so is backing this new Taliban, which is like, yeah. So definitely Pakistan and India both have been doing some kind of like cooking in that kitchen, is what I say. And maybe even Iran. It's a little. I'm not entirely sure what this new version of the Taliban that is now in Afghanistan is exactly, but there's definitely evidence that both India and Pakistan have been like kind of doing something with them. There's also evidence that Iran has been actually no, there's some evidence, some limited evidence. And
yeah, so
I don't know what's going on, and so I think we should just wait and see. But it's a little different than the movement that came up in 1996, because a lot of them were just like from refugee camps, and they were given books by the CIA that was like really fanatical. So
of course it's the CIA.
tell you what's going on with this Taliban, and we just have to wait and see, because it seems like they can't even give a coherent answer to the kind of government they have, because they're still negotiating with all these factions. So, like, the main Taliban guy, Suhail, maybe his name, I can't remember. He was on CGTN, which is China's network, and they asked him, like, what kind of government? And he couldn't give an answer, and it sounds like they're still the only reason he can't give an answer is because they don't really have a government, in that they're still negotiating with some various factions, is what I'm guessing. So it seems there's a lot of panic and not enough perspective. So so right now we don't know what's going on, who the government is going to be, what kind of people there will be, what kind of government they're going to have. Like, it's just vague. So they've said it's going to be Islamic, and it's like, and based on like consensus. So that sounds like, I don't think, we're going to have be a government for good things and against bad things. And that means we need patience, because every government's going to say, we're going to be for good things and against bad things. And we need to see what kind of healthcare system are they going to have? Are they going to have a healthcare system? Like, there's so much. And the fact that even the spokesperson does not.
I don't know if you can read that. I can't read that.
Okay, hold on. I can do it. Does anyone know where Esha is? Where I'm from? I asked in English, but no one responded. I'm originally from India, but I grew up in Michigan. I speak Spanish, but not Portuguese. But I can close enough that I was able to.
Yeah, but it says Esha shines light. It's getting a little dark around you, but you're like emanating the light.
Yeah, that's the point. So yeah, I'm sorry I went off in a big rant, because
no, you're fine. I enjoy rants personally.
Okay, going back to Western feminism, what Western feminists need to do is understand what imperialism is, what kind of relationship the U.S. has. What does the U.S. Army do when they go to Afghanistan? Who gets the oil contracts? How many patents are privatized? Are they privatizing seeds, and which they did in Iraq and Afghanistan? So you kind of have to look at it in a more transactional way to see how it affects women, and it'll become obvious. So if they're not getting babies milk, or there's a lot of issues that women will have, that privatizing their seeds is not a way to fix it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And privatizing their water is not the way. And so what you'll then have to understand
bombing
is,
them
okay,
to oblivion, not the way.
no, okay, so let's say you privatize their water. Now, do people need water? So they're going to rebel. But then what are you going to have is a death squad that shoots people so that you can extract their water. So that's how, as long as you're extracting their resources, there can never be a democracy, because democracy means don't want you there to continue to extract. And so that's simple. And these kind of investigations are not even hard to do, because most of this is public record. So if you go to Monsanto's website and check their disclosures, it'll tell you. I check most of this at Congress.gov. Like, there are congressional hearings about Ismail Khan's gang rape. Like in 2003, they had hearings. There are C-SPAN videos where the congressional representatives talk about this. So this is not hard to find. But it seems like Western feminists are either incapable or unwilling to even ask the right questions to see what's going on.
No, absolutely. And I think that, as you said, as long as we are extracting and occupying and,
Occupation happens when you need to extract resources against their will. So
exactly. And as long as we're doing all of that, as long as we're imposing our will on them, then they cannot be self-actualized. They cannot have empowerment. We cannot empower them. They have to be able to empower themselves. And they can't empower themselves if they don't truly have a democratic environment. And they can't have that if we're occupying them and extracting from them.
Yeah, the first is extraction. And then when the extraction, something happens, that's when the U.S. military goes to to fight the will of the people. It's always done that. And the reason why is, let's just look at the Cold War. Guess what? Who was the U.S. military fighting in Korean War? Koreans or Russians? Koreans. Vietnam? Vietnamese. Afghanistan? I mean, it's like you see that the Russians are not anywhere, especially except Afghanistan, but that's another story. But because people are willing to fight and die to stop colonial extraction, because it's horrific. Being under colonialism is the worst thing on earth, and you'll see. But nobody is willing to fight and die. The reason why you couldn't use Koreans in the Korean War is because the U.S. government tried. Guess what? All the South Koreans, they had this fascist Sigmund Freud. They mass defected, and then they had the Genji massacre, which they massacred, where the South Korean government massacred God knows how many. They still find mass graves. And then that's when the U.S.
there's a bridge where they were shot.
Yeah. That's
oh my gosh! There are just bullet holes all over that bridge. It's insane.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so then the U.S. came in to basically prop up this psychotic fascist. So what you see is that the reason why the U.S. Army themselves need to go is because nobody's willing to die for the psychotic fascist, while people are willing to die for their country. And that's as simple as that. Thank you. A font?
A font of knowledge, yes.
Font.
I think it's fount. A fount of knowledge.
Oh, fountain. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
I remember really well, but that's why. And you would too if you knew what the U.S. government does and nobody else knows. And I feel like Cassandra from the Greek mythology, where I'm yelling and nobody's listening.
I feel like that's a lot of us. We're all a bunch of Cassandras.
I know.
We're just kind of screaming into the ether and just it's why are you so angry? Why are you not angry?
Exactly. If you knew what was going on, you would be 100 times angrier than me. I get angry because I've seen these. Oh my God! In Chuck Chuck, I put this picture up, video up of the Democratic government when they redistributed land, and all these boomers. Apparently, I made them cry, and they did not know that was going on. And I'm like, yeah, you destroyed it. Thank you, boomer.
Right.
But if you see for every article I write, there's 10,000 sources that you're not gonna see. So that I still have in my head that bothers me, the massacres and all this, and I see the patterns, and I'm like, oh, okay, all the U.S. government does is go extract resources, and they don't actually want to stop extracting, and the U.S. people are, there's enough people who are comfortable enough that they don't care, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Right, because it doesn't affect them. If it doesn't affect them, they don't give a shit. That's honestly what we're all trying to do here. You know, we're trying to, build international solidarity. And you build international solidarity by being supportive and not trying to take over other people's lives and impose your wishes on them.
The thing is that a lot of people think that they're for international solidarity when they say, "Oh, what about the women?" Or what?
But what are you doing to actually help them? Like, look at the entire 20 years and actually look at the research, and you'll find that the U.S. has done less than nothing to help them. They backed the warlords that were raping women,
mass raping them.
Mass raping women, gang raping women.
I forgot.
The U.S. was backing these guys.
In 2008, these warlords got mass amnesty from the government of Afghanistan for all their previous war crimes. And that just ended up missing most of the
Yes, as told by the West. Yeah. All these stories as told by the West. We don't get to hear from them. We just...
Well, a lot of times...
If we do hear from them, it's like the ones at the highest levels.
Yeah, a lot of times, yes. Mm-hmm. For me, the biggest difference is I looked at... So, the day Kabul, whatever happened to Kabul, fell, liberate, whatever you want to call it, I don't even care. Like, the day they had a change of government.
Yeah. When the Taliban took over, yeah.
I don't know. Like, I don't like to say fall because it implies the U.S. owned it. I don't want to say liberated.
Yeah.
But whatever. The day they had a change of government, I looked at the CNN report where this weird lady did not know what she was doing, and she's like, "These people seem nice, but they are chanting death to America," and I'm like, "Yeah, because wouldn't you?" But then, if you saw the CGTN, they had a Pashto, the Chinese government, they had a Pashto-speaking reporter on the ground. He went to the right places and was asking the right questions. So this, shopkeeper is like, okay, last week, these thugs from the government looted my entire shop and had me to pay the bribe. I just want to run my little bakery. No, it was not a bakery. It was some sort of sweet shop. It was some sort of food shop. I don't know what it was. But he was like, I just want to run my shop. That's all. Just I want you guys to leave me alone, is what he said. So even the U.S. reporters, it shows you what they're paid not to understand or question. Mm-hmm. And you see the same thing. The U.S. ambassador to whatever country does what's his name? Rahm Emanuel speak Japanese? No. But guess what? If you look at the Chinese ambassador to Serbia, she's speaking Serbian. And Serbian's a much harder language, not harder, but much less spoken than, say, Japanese. So each Chinese ambassador ends up speaking the local language, knows what's going on, and the U.S. ambassador is totally clueless. So you see these little things, and it's because these people are paid not to...
they're just actors. Yeah. They just read a teleprompter.
They're... I was so upset with that weird segment with CNN because she was not actually trying to discover anything, and she didn't even speak the local language. And when you look at the CGTN, they had a completely different one. They had somebody, I don't know where he was from, but he spoke the language, and he went into these little back alleys instead of on the main roads and asked the little shopkeepers and just people who you wouldn't think to ask. So the kind of even just that little bit of care makes a big difference.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an excellent point, Schmoopy. Paid to manufacture consent. That's exactly what their job is. Their job is to manufacture consent. Nadia, I'm not entirely sure who... The British feminist whose picture you put up as an example of a white feminist. I'm not exactly sure.
You put up Marie Le Pen from France.
Oh, on that article, maybe? Oh, yeah, I think the one that was on top. I'm not sure. Let me go back to it, actually. Let me bring it back up. Let me bring it back up, and maybe I can find out. It may have been Marie Le Pen, but I know it was also talking about a German German woman too. Let me see.
I don't want to. I get frightened by German far right.
Let me scroll back up to the top. Come on, don't freeze on me now. There it goes. Okay.
Yeah, I get really frightened.
That's Marie Le Pen. Marine Le Pen. Yeah, she is definitely a femonationalist. She's a white supremacist.
She's her dad or grandfather literally collaborated with Adolf Hitler. Like,
yeah, she's the daughter of a literal Nazi.
A daughter or granddaughter? I'm not 100% sure about that. But
so I would not take her word on anything, because her entire reasoning is all based on racism. That's true.
Well, no, I think her entire thing is based on, my grandfather's not a war criminal, or whatever. I mean, but it's psycho, and she's like I said, very fascist. But the problem with her is that
I would not consider her a feminist, but she considers herself a feminist, and that's one of the problems. And that's femonationalism is very much a combination of right-wing nationalism and feminist rhetoric. So it's using female empowerment and women's rights as justification for right-wing politics.
So it's like, I'm sure, more women concentration camp guards.
Exactly. More female drone pilots.
One of the
worst we need all the female drone pilots.
Is this Washington Post? Like, what are the unexpected?
We love a woke CIA.
No. One of the unexpected side effects of the war in Yemen is that more men are doing the cooking and cleaning, and then you're like, why? Oh, you've just killed their entire family. Ha 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 ha. Yeah, but the drones are. Jeez. So it's like, so you're killed. So stop. If you stop killing women and children, and you're like, that's not Mexican. That's like the worst thing.
Yeah. But I mean, that is definitely, this is definitely, as we've been saying, one of the big problems with the Western left, and you can even call it, the bourgeois feminists is, and we'll talk about more of that in a second, because we're going to look at a piece from Clara Zetkin in which she's talking to Vladimir Lenin about the women's question. And we're going to look at that in just a second, and basically what they're talking about in regard to bourgeois feminists. And I've been reading a lot about also Alexandra. I just forgot her name. Nolate or something like that. I can't believe I just forgot it. Huh?
Have you read Nadezhda Krupskaya, like I said?
I haven't yet. She's on my list. I have so many things I have to read.
The UN Prize for Literacy is called the Nadezhda Krupskaya Prize, and she's literally the brains behind Lenin, in that she was a librarian, and she's the reason why half the world can read now. Nadezhda Krupskaya.
Oh, it was Alexandra Kollontai. That's who I was thinking of. Alexandra Kollontai. I've been reading a lot about her, and she was really good at mixing Marxism and feminism, and she was first in the commissar. She was one of the first female commissaires of the Soviet Union. So lots of cool things to talk about with that. But this is what we're talking about, like this idea of, like, as Esha mentioned, like, even mentioning, like, they can't dress the way that they want. They can't, go to school. Like, this is, a lot of that is very much from the bourgeois feminist point of view, because we're caring more about, the fact that they're trying to just survive, and, they're trying to work, and
not even work, just want to get, like, they can't even
just want to get by.
Walk on the street without a warlord, if they don't have the right clearances from warlords, or else they're going to get extorted. Like, that, I mean,
But we care about fashion. It's like, that is so bourgeois.
Yeah. Like, one of the worst things, like, I've seen is this, like, a meme about Iran before the revolution. And you see, like, some girl in, like, okay, and first of all, half the time they show the Iran picture, and it's not Iran, it's Afghanistan, but whatever.
Yeah, the one about in Kabul. Yeah.
No. Sometimes they call it Iran, and you're like, okay, first of all, this is not Iran. But they do, and once in a while accidentally show pictures of women in Iran. What you realize is before the revolution, only 43% of the women in Iran could read. After the revolution in 1979, 100% of the women can read. And, you know, also...
Right. And, like, women were creating co-ops.
No, hold on. In Iran, they actually have... In Saudi Arabia, too, surprisingly, they actually have more women in universities than the U.S. in both percentage-wise. Like, as in, I think 55% of the women in university in Saudi Arabia are women. In Iran, it's even higher. Like, I think 60% of the university graduates are women, and women have, like, some of the highest paying jobs, and the gender pay gap is less than the U.S. Weird. But if you're going to focus on what they're going to wear, you have to understand that it was lots of complicated things happen, but you kind of don't, like, for example, my favorite is some right-winger asked me, oh my God, this teacher is being persecuted in rural Iran. And I was like, well, at least they have a teacher. Under the Shah, they had ninth graders teaching people in rural areas. And I don't know what to say, but ninth grader's not going to teach you very good arithmetic. But then they built schools and had actual teachers. So before you can persecute teachers, there must be teachers, and that's a big improvement. And, like, that's kind of like a lot of the way you're framing. They don't understand how bad things were under the imperial comprador lackey government. Like, they did not even have schools. They had ninth graders. And
that's because we're not taught that history. We're just not. We're not taught it at all.
I mean, I wasn't, like, for me, I just get very suspicious when there's something like this, and I'm like, let me check.
Right.
And then when you check the before and after, what you'll see is that, under the Shah, for example, they actually drilled more oil under the Shah, but then 40% of the money just, like, went to the U.S. But after the revolution, they drilled less oil, but they still got better, like, they still pumped more electricity because most of that money was staying inside and helping the people as opposed to just, like, being pumped out. So you'll see that a lot of, like if you don't have you have to just always check the economy first and then kind of see what else is going on, because it's easy to show imperial porn proper. I call it atrocity porn. I mean, you can show whatever you want. Like, you can say, this, you know about the incubator babies, right? In Iraq, like, the first war, this, like, Kuwait, she was the daughter of a Kuwaiti diplomat who said, like, Saddam Hussein threw all these incubator babies out the window or something, and
oh my God,
lie. So it's easy to manufacture atrocity porn. And when I was writing an article about Iraq, just saying that the fact that they didn't have water to drink in the 90-degree heat never made it to after the U.S. never made it. But the incubator baby made it for weeks. So, yeah, it's like, and it works because no one it's not even questioning. No one even just thinks about, what if, like I don't understand how consent is manufactured here, because I don't know how many people actually believe the incubator babies were versus how many stayed quiet because they didn't care versus how many stayed quiet because they were too afraid to speak out.
Yeah, no, 100%. Like, that's crazy. Like, do you have some sources? Yes, I do, and I will make sure to link them down below. And actually, a little bit more, before we move to kind of compare, since we're comparing, Western feminism, and we'll get into a little bit of that Soviet feminism in just a moment, in order to kind of look at really a lot of the differences between the two. one of the items that I also want to recommend that you guys look at, and that's because it really talks about like this kind of fake solidarity that exists in the West. And let me share my screen. And if you really want to understand like this kind of how Western women tend to look at women, non-Western women, they used to be called, third world women, but that's not really the correct terminology anymore.
No, I prefer developing nations or global south, because at least
global south is good. Yeah.
No, global south is the worst. I hate that.
Oh, you hate that? That's interesting.
Yeah, I prefer third world because at least it's honest about the devastation that is given upon that you guys make everyone else live through. The global south is too sanitized, in my opinion, and it's not even in the south. So I actually prefer third world just because it shows you like that it was. But the best one would be underdeveloped, as in the West came in and underdeveloped, like they bombed the factory in Sudan, like, and then you're like, what is that? So
how do you feel about post-colonial?
No, because there is no post-colonial. It's still under colonial. Most of the world is still under colonial occupation by the IMF and the World Bank and just straight up war and coups. So I don't think we have a post-colonial world. It's premature, is what I'd say.
Yeah, and for those who don't understand, global north versus global south, and one of the reasons that has been chosen is like the global north. What?
I mean, I would rather say colonizer, colonize, raper.
Yeah.
Anything.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's basically what the global north, global south conversation is about. Is like global north as being the colonizers and the global south being the colonized.
Version of the word global north, because it makes it seem like they're like white and lily and snow, as opposed to if you call looters, the beneficiaries of genocide, beneficiaries of imperialism, beneficiaries of like ruining the rest of the world. Like anything else is better than the sanitized version that literally takes away all the history and so maybe imperializer, anything. Like I just don't like that, because that's what the entire purpose is, to remove the exploitation, like the aspect of the historical exploitation from the conversation.
Yeah, and that's exactly what this author Chandra Talpin Mohanty, this is one of her seminal works, Under Western Eyes. I would also recommend Feminism Beyond Borders. But she's talking about like the fact that because of colonization, it's a very different phenomena that exists. So it ought to be of some political significance, at least, that the term colonization has come to denote a variety of phenomena in recent feminist and left writings. But one of the things that she talks about is that there's a particular cultural discourse about what is called the third world. However sophisticated or problematical its use on an explanatory construct, colonization almost invariably implies a relation of structural domination and a suppression, often violent, of the heterogeneity of the subject in question. What I wish to analyze is specifically the production of the third world woman as a singular monolithic subject in some recent Western feminist texts. Yeah. So she's really getting into this idea of like the othering of third world women, non-Western women, like creating a monolith around them as this other.
Well,
and that the West is like, the Western women were so, as she says here, like focusing on scholarship and knowledge, that the women in the left, they have all the knowledge, they have all the empowerment, and third world women are savage and underdeveloped and so on.
The right questions to ask, like we saw from that Nation article. So how on earth, like if you can't even ask the right question to do your investigation, like how on earth are you gonna even do decent? I don't know. To me, it's just that's the first thing. Is you just don't understand what the right question to ask is.
Yeah, exactly. And that's basically what Mohanty is getting into in this article, is like the construction of the third world woman under the Western eyes. Like, so through the Western point of view.
Yeah.
And how that creates an othering of third world women. So I highly recommend that if you can check this out, and I'll try to maybe put the file. I would highly recommend checking it out.
Oh no, and they also get the oppressor completely wrong, because if you don't have the colonial relationships, sure, you can talk about I don't know how women are oppressed under whatever random religion you pick, but why, how it came to be, was it always this case? And the answer is no. And you're not even, most Western women aren't even trained to recognize oppression, as evidenced by the fact that there have been very few articles written about the past 20 years of the warlord economy. So I mean, if you can't even ask the right question to do the right investigation, I don't know how useful you can be for anything besides imperial propaganda, is what I'm going to say.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, go ahead. Keep going.
I mean, it's like I said, the entire framework is just wrong. And the idea, the way the reality works, it's completely inverted. So what people don't realize is that, suppose that women were not oppressed, like in, say, Yugoslavia or the Soviet Union. Guess what happens? Your imperial propaganda changes, and in Yugoslavia they're like, what about the oppression of the Catholics? And you realize, 95% of the Catholic priests were Nazis that literally murdered children and hung them from meat hooks, so they should be oppressed. So thank God for that. They'll just pick a different one. So it's like, if the women were not oppressed, they'll wonder if Islam is being, or like they're doing with Xinjiang, China, where suddenly they're apparently having a genocide, even though, and apparently since there's a genocide, why is the U.S. asking them to accept refugees from Afghanistan? None of it makes sense. But when you can't, when you're empowering the women, giving them birth control. Today, even Newsweek wrote an article about 4.5 million children that won't be born because of the IUD. The copper T. What's it called?
The IUD, yeah.
Okay, phew. What's the thing that explodes?
Esha, are you a tanky?
Yeah, of course I'm a tanky. I'm singing the March of the Soviet Tanks right now. Okay. Sure, I can talk closer to the mic.
Yeah.
But what you realize is that they'll pick something else to concern troll about. So you shouldn't even be suspicious of why they're concerned trolling about this one particular thing, as opposed to the other thing. Like I said, with China, when women are being empowered via birth control or whatever, they're now calling it genocide. So they'll never actually, you can't actually, you have to hunt for it if it's not in the U.S. national interest to create it. So I don't know what else to say other than you can't trust the framework given to you. So you have to ask them, why are they worried about women in Afghanistan as opposed to, say, I don't know,
Saudi
genocide,
Arabia?
whatever. No. In Afghanistan, if the women were not oppressed, they would make up something like is there a Pashto genocide like they do in China. So they will spin. So when it's a secular government, they'll say, oh, why is the Soviet Union suppressing religion? And you're like, that's because all the priests were Nazis. And then so what you'll see is that they'll just flip that to religious oppression or some other oppression. So if it's a government that won't let the U.S. loot, they'll pick a random oppression like they're doing with China. And that you kind of have to learn how to not take their framing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you there? Are you there? Yeah, you're freezing. You're freezing.
I'm here. Did I freeze? Am I here? I don't know why I'm freezing all of a sudden. My internet seems fine. I don't know. Maybe my computer's just like, hey, it's time to go to sleep. My computer wants to go to sleep. I don't know if that's it or not. Can everyone see me okay?
Yeah, now I can.
Okay. I don't know why my connection is struggling right now. I don't know. That was weird. I don't know. Okay, so before because we have about 20 minutes left, so before we have to end the show, let's get into a little bit of talking about the difference between, as we said, like Western feminism, but now let's look a little bit at Soviet feminism, specifically how Lenin, because I know you're a big fan of Lenin, so let's bring him in here. And we're going to look at how Lenin answered the woman question. So this was an interview that he did with a German communist feminist, Clara Zetkin. Is it not coming up yet? Okay.
Oh, okay. I'll look it up. I don't have to see the screen for them then.
Everyone see it okay?
It doesn't matter.
Okay, I just want to make sure everyone can see it okay. Hope everyone can see me okay, because I don't know why my internet is screwing up all of a sudden. It was just fine a few minutes ago. Alright, so we have Clara Zetkin interviewing Lenin on the woman question, and let me zoom in on this a little bit.
No, you don't have to.
It's a little bit clearer. Okay. I'm just talking about, like, for the audience, that way we can all see it. So this, Clara had multiple conversations with Lenin in which they conversed about the women's question and how to mobilize women and bring them into the Communist Party. And so I highlighted a few parts. First, that Lenin, like, one of the first things that he said was that we must by all means set up a powerful international women's movement on a clear-cut theoretical basis.
I agree. I mean, but what we have to remember back then in Russia was that the literacy rate was at 14%, and for women it was at 7%. So it was a completely different situation. Of course, the majority were rural and under kind of like a feudal lord. So you have to remember what the situation back then was for the women in order to understand what he is meaning. And I don't know if most people so I just wanted to remind you, it sucked. I mean, it sucked for everyone, but it also was very
because even reading about, like, Alexandra Kollontai, one of the things that it mentioned about her is that, like, a lot of the early socialist women were of a higher class because they were the ones who were able to get educated by going to Zurich and learning Marxist literature.
Going to school, as in, like, not working at a factory or a sweatshop, that was only like 10% of the women in Russia. So we're not even talking about Zurich. We're literally talking about going to second grade, because so many women had to drop out in order to work in sweatshops or their parents couldn't afford it. So So I don't know what to say, but I mean, but even if Nadezhda, Lenin's wife, was like some sort of petty nobility, even with her, she kind of kept. She actually had a school where she like taught a lot of people how to read and spoke with a lot of factory workers. So she kind of was the voice of women who were unable to do that. And modern day Western feminists are not capable of doing that because they literally collaborate with the worst scum, like Gloria Steinem. She was a CIA agent who dated Henry Kissinger. Like, she was collaborating with the worst scum of the earth. So, that's the main difference.
Yeah, and also when we consider like this, like a lot of these interviews were happening, like right around, like not long before. I think it was like most of them were taking place around like this one took place in like the autumn of 1920. So, I mean, imagine, this is the time, like, there were women and they had already earned the right to vote in 1917. A lot of the leadership in Soviet Russia were women, and they're talking about creating like a women's conference and a women's congress. Like, this is the 1920s when the United States women were only just now gaining the right to vote, and wouldn't see this type of mobilization until the 1960s.
Well,
so Soviet women were like, huh?
I don't think you've ever seen this kind of mobilization in the United States, to be honest. But during World War II...
No, absolutely, because that, like, the mobilization that happened in the United States was very much a bourgeois feminist mobilization. It was not this type of mobilization that they have here, of actually truly creating a new system that will uplift women.
Yeah. Like I said, in World War II, where 27 million people died, like women were doing all sorts of jobs. In the U.S., they were like in military. They were you could see the difference. So what you realize is that actually last week's Late Night with Lenin, we kind of get into a little bit like while in the West women have the right to divorce, it's not meaningful if they still need to. If they're dependent on their husband for their livelihood or whatnot. So what is a legal right versus what is actually possible is the biggest gap between, I guess, the West and the East is what I'd say.
Right, and that's even one thing that, like, they're talking about, like, he's talking about what's wrong with the bourgeois feminist movement that's happening in Russia. As there were bourgeois feminist organizations that were also active during this time. And one of the things that he's talking about is, and I highlighted this here, and where he's talking about, first he's talking about the fact that Rosa Luxemburg is, like, writing and mobilizing prostitutes in order to,
And already by then.
Yeah. And basically writing, to organize prostitutes as a special revolutionary guild, but he's talking about like this idea of like sexuality. He's questioning whether sexuality is something that is worth kind of talking about as a way of organizing, and he like, but one thing they do kind of get into is like the idea of sex and social reproductive theory in a little bit, in a way. And I would highly recommend another book I'm going to recommend is Social Reproduction Theory by Tithi Bhattacharya, which is all about a materialist point of view on reproduction and women's labor.
Yeah, I mean, what we also have to remember is there's a lot of eugenics going on in the world right now. So people are saying, hey, we should get abortions to like get rid of like the inferior races, and like there's a lot of psychotic eugenics going on. So under this backdrop, the discussion is completely different because and then the World War and then the genocide happened, and genocides, I guess. So so it's a completely different, I guess, discussion that I guess we don't. I mean, I guess there is kind of a social engineering, but it's not so obvious and out in the open, I guess.
Yeah, and one of the things that Clara brings up here in that context is that a lot of bringing up sex within the context of mobilizing and bringing people in class consciousness raising is that she's bringing it up as a reaction against the distortions and the hypocrisy of bourgeois society. She mentions knowledge of the modifications of the forms of marriage and family that took place in the course of history, and and Lenin also brings this up within the context of Engels, who wrote about the family being an oppressive system for women.
Yeah.
But so the knowledge and the modifications of the forms of marriage and family that took place in the course of history and of their dependence on economics was served to rid the minds of working women of their preconceived idea of the eternity of bourgeois society. The critically historical attitude to this had to lead to an unrelenting analysis of bourgeois society and exposure of its essence and its consequence, including the branding of false sex morality. So this idea of like, oh, we have to have sex within marriage. Like if you're being slutty, then that's a problem. But like that's a false morality in order to keep women entrapped in the family structure.
If you're like doing marriage for dowry, is that any different?
Exactly. Because under capitalism, all sex is transactional. Whether it's within a marriage because it's still for economic reasons, you're trying to keep a roof over your head, you're trying to stay married. Like, it's still a transaction that is occurring.
Yeah. So, like I said, the nuclear family structure in the U.S., it did not even go across time within the U.S. It changed so much. So across space and time, it's so different. And so what we consider acceptable can't be universalized, is what I would say. And I guess that's what makes it the hardest, because without knowing a lot of history in specific situations, we can't even tell what is feminist oppression versus feminist liberation.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's why they can manipulate it till no end. With and that's kind of the crux of it, is to manipulate it for imperial goals. Because if you're not manipulating for imperial goals, you'll just get shut down. And the only ones that rise to the top are the ones who can use it for imperial goals, I guess.
Yeah, and that's something that, I mean, both Lenin and also Alexandra Kolente, yeah, I would recommend reading some of her work, guys, because she definitely gets into, because she was very critical. Alexandra Kolente was very critical of the bourgeois feminists, because they were basically, all they wanted to do was, I've highlighted a lot of this also from Feminism for the 99%, which is behind me, is that they wanted the right to vote because they just wanted the same power that the men had. They didn't actually want to rebuild the structure in order to give everyone else power. And that's one of the reasons that she was so critical of it. And that's also mentioned here, is that a lot of the discussion about like sex and marriage is not built into a historical materialism. It's not talking about the social reproductive structure that is like the fact that one of the reasons that bourgeois men wanted to be married was basically women's bodies are a means of production, and they wanted to own that means of production. That way they could make sure that whatever children were being produced, whatever workers were being produced, were theirs. And that was the whole point, is that they wanted to be able to pass down inheritance. And so how do you make sure that you're passing down inheritance to children that are actually yours? You need to own the means of production.
Yep.
So if you don't include sex and marriage within a structure, within a system that's talking within a class consciousness, then you're not actually talking about anything that's actually going to help women.
Exactly. And actually, I want to add to this, because Human Rights Campaign was involved in legalizing gay marriage a lot. But then 2 weeks ago, there was a scandal having to do with them like hiding Andrew Cuomo's times. And so what you notice is that, and then they named Raytheon the employer of the whatever for like 8 years or something. So what you realize is that, again, the reason why they were obsessing about gay marriage was because it was all about the passing down bourgeoisie property to their partners or their children or whatever. But they didn't care much more than that because they supported Raytheon, and on top of that, they kind of hid Andrew Cuomo's entire deeds, I guess, is the best word. I don't know what to call it, whatever. All the things, it's just so much, like, I don't know how to summarize that. So you see that same exact pattern passing on in the other kind, like in the LGBTQ liberation study. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely optimism at the will. Like, that's exactly the point. It's like, I would really recommend reading Social Reproduction Theory because it really gets into that. The fact that capitalism is built on women's free labor. And that's why they try to separate, like, the public from the private, and they try to say, like, oh, this is a private issue. It's like, no, because it's just as much involved in the public. And that's one of something else that Claire Zetkin gets into as well, is that, sex and, we can't consider it a private issue because it very much is involved in the public, because you're reproducing a labor for the public, you're producing workers for the public.
Yep.
So it's the private and the public are not actually separate. They're very much involved with one another.
Yeah.
And if you consider the fact that women's labor was very much privatized to the home, then you understand that how much free labor is being created by women. That the book, I can't remember who the author is of the book, Why Women Have Better Sex Under Socialism, but she gets into that point of the fact that women create billions and billions of dollars every single year of free unpaid labor that we will never ever see. Capitalism would collapse without all that labor.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and that never gets added into the equation either. And yeah, I mean, that's the first thing. For me, well, actually, the first thing is, of course, the biggest oppressor and the biggest contradiction right now is definitely imperialism. So, so I guess I'd say, like, you can't really talk about feminism alone without looking at how everything else affects it, and I don't see that happening at all in the West. I just see these, like, trying to create a little box around whatever they want to study as opposed to opening the box. You know what I mean?
Exactly. And that's one of the huge importance of, intersectionality. You can't just look at one thing. You can't just view feminism or one issue like abortion through one lens. You have to look at it from multiple directions, like, because it's very intersectional. Like, it is a race issue, it is a class issue, it is a gender issue, like, it's all of those things, and so you can't just look at it from one point of view.
Oh yeah.
And I love what you have to say here, optimism. It's like, I love Nancy Fraser. She's one of my faves, and she also wrote the book Fortunes of Feminism, where she talks about how feminism is in the West particularly is a handmaid of capitalism. So I would highly recommend, another good one that I highly recommend.
Yeah, it's like very...
Oh, it was Nancy Fulbray. Yes, that's a different one, but Who Pays for Kids by Nancy Fulbray. But yeah, I would definitely recommend anything by Nancy Fraser, including this book right here. She's a co-writer. Feminism for the 99%. I would highly recommend that one if you haven't read it.
Yep.
It's very short. It's very small. She's like, oh, look how small it is. It's just like this little pocket book. It's literally like, you guys could read this in an afternoon. It's less than 90 pages. Read that book. Read this book. You will learn so much.
Yeah.
I'm trying to get her on my show. I'm trying to get Titi Barakari on my show.
Yeah, and I guess, yeah. And it's like I said, there's like actually there, I forgot her name. It's not coming Rafia Zakaria. She actually recently just wrote a book about white feminists and how much she's a Pakistani writer. She's written for the Dawn. And this like Western white guy, Isaac something, I can't remember his name, was basically saying that like, oh my God, look at how she's concerned. Like it was smearing a Pakistani woman who's writing about white feminism, and but she rightfully called out Susan Sarandon, because Susan Sarandon in 2001 did kind of did fall for the oh my God, the woman kind of trap. So yeah, whenever they're focusing on an ethnic group, any group like the West, just be suspicious of it and figure out, just kind of explore. You just have to like just jump in and explore. And thank you so
Christopher.
Much. Really
That's my goal here. I love being educational. I'm an educator, so. One last thing before we have to wrap up. A lot of folks in power, assimilation, and maintenance don't really much care about what intersectionalism. They exploit as always. Yeah, because like now they just use the term intersectional. Basically, it's another word for diversity, which that's not what it is.
Diversity, is that like more women?
Yeah, that's diversity. Intersectionality is something very different. But they like to interchange the two words. All right, but we only have a few minutes left. So Esha, before we wrap up, please tell our audience what you have, anything that you want to plug, and where can they find you.
Well, today we just released an article that tells you the truth about the Berlin Wall, which they've often framed as, in the East Germany, they called it the anti-fascist wall. So you kind of will see that. I'm also working on an article about Afghanistan since 1992. And I'm also, this week we have Steve Grumbine from Real Progressives for Late Night with Lenin, which we're getting into a little bit of imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism, which everyone should read, so that you know what happens and why people in Africa are poor and you're not a lot of times. Yes, absolutely.
Interesting point.
So, of course, follow me on Twitter at my account and at historic_ly. And I recently acquired another 3-day ban on TikTok, but when I'll be back on the 29th. So follow me.
And your ad on Twitter is Esha Legal.
Yep,
Esha Legal.
Right here. Yeah. There's no space though. I accidentally put a space. And with that, we should definitely do some kind of tech out or geek out or something like that. I'll try to see what we can do with that. And we should do some kind of, we should have you back again. And hopefully, you can find me at historically.substack.com. Please become a paid subscriber. And with that, I will bid you auf Wiedersehen.
Thank you so much for being on the show, Esha. All right, so before I wrap up, so make sure to check me out next Tuesday. I'm going to have Andre Walton, and we're going to talk about how to organize in rural and conservative areas, which is something I'm very interested in learning about. So definitely check me out next Tuesday. And also, the Killjoy Guide will be moving. We're going to be moving to Sunday nights at 6 o'clock. So definitely keep us on your calendar. So starting probably next week, Sundays at 6 o'clock instead of Thursdays at 7. All right. So with all that being, and also, as always, Nerdologics on Mondays at 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time or 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So check us out next week on Nerdologics and also on the Killjoy Guide. So please support the show on Ko-fi. I'm now on Ko-fi and Patreon. And there's some really cool benefits over there, including being able to access my Discord server and also getting personalized shout outs on social media. And I'll also have some other things coming up as well. I also really, since I love recommending books to you guys, I really want to start a book club. So, definitely, let me know if you're interested in any of that. But definitely support the show any way that you can. I love all of you guys. This has been the Killjoy Guide, the Left Feminist podcast for the 99%. And I will see you Killjoys next time. Bye! Thank you so much for watching. If you liked what you saw, please give it a thumbs up. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another video. See you Killjoys next time.